So I want you to picture this scenario. It is 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, the classic afternoon slump.
Right, exactly. You are sitting at your desk, just staring at a blinking cursor on this glaring monitor. You have absolutely hit a wall.
Yeah, your energy is just totally gone.
Completely. You have this massive mountain of complex, demanding work to get through. But almost like you have been possessed by some unseen force, you just find yourself wandering away from your desk.
Heading straight toward the kitchen to rummage for a snack, probably?
Or, you unthinkingly pick up your phone, your thumb is just swiping to open a social media app before you have even consciously decided to look at a screen.
Yeah, it is total autopilot.
It really is. And then 20 or 30 minutes later, you snap out of the trance, you are frustrated, you are behind on your tasks, and you are left asking yourself that age-old question, like, why do I keep doing this when I know better?
It is a profoundly universal feeling, honestly. That moment of waking up from your own behavioral autopilot is something every human being experiences.
Which is exactly what we are going to decode today. So, welcome to this special Cortex Lab deep dive.
We are really getting into the mechanics of human behavior today.
We absolutely are. We have a massive stack of sources for this one. Neurological studies, clinical behavioral psychology, organizational blueprints, all centered around the architecture of habit formation.
It is a fascinating subject. We are going to dig deeply into the mechanics of why we do what we do.
And more importantly, how you, the listener, can stop fighting your own brain and start fundamentally reprogramming it.
Because to truly understand the scale of what we are dealing with here, we should probably look at a landmark 2006 paper from researchers at Duke University.
Oh yeah, the statistics in that paper are wild.
They really are. They found that more than 40% of the actions people perform every single day aren't actual conscious decisions.
40%.
More than 40%, yeah. They are automatic habits. We walk around feeling like these, rational agents making deliberate choices all day.
Right, like we are the captains of our own ships.
Yep, exactly. But the reality is that for nearly half of your waking hours, the conscious decision-making part of your brain is essentially asleep at the wheel.
That is just staggering.
Yeah.
Almost half of my day is basically me sleepwalking through routines while under the illusion of control.
It is a hostile takeover of our daily lives, really.
So if we are going to understand how that happens, we need to look at the physical hardware of the brain. The sources point us straight to a specific cluster of tissue, right?
Yeah, so if you picture the human brain like an onion, the outermost layers, the neocortex, that is where the complex conscious thinking happens.
Like doing math or writing an email.
Right, or consciously deciding you want to lose weight or write a novel. But deep down, near the brainstem, there is this much older, more primitive structure.
It's about the size of a golf ball, right?
Yeah, a golf ball-sized lump of tissue called the basal ganglia. And this is essentially the brain's central command for automatic routines.
Why does the brain even need a separate command center for that?
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, the brain is incredibly energy hungry. I mean, it consumes a massive amount of our body's glucose and ATP.
So it is basically just trying to stop us from starving to death from thinking too hard.
That is literally it. It is constantly looking for ways to conserve cognitive energy. So when a sequence of actions gets repeated, the brain physically wires those actions together.
And that is what they call chunking, right?
Exactly. It hands the routine down to the basal ganglia in a process called chunking.
Okay, so chunking sounds like a neat organizational trick. But I want to understand what is actually happening to the brain's energy consumption when this occurs.
The sources detail a really fascinating experiment for this. It was done by researchers at MIT in the late 90s.
Using rats in a maze, right?
Yeah, they focused on this exact chunking mechanism using rats, and they didn't just watch them, they built these highly controlled, dollhouse-sized surgical theaters.
Wow, dollhouse-sized.
Yeah, and they kept the rooms at a chilly 60 degrees to ensure the surgeon's hands wouldn't shake. Then they implanted microscopic electrode sensors directly into the rats' brains to monitor individual neurons.
Just to see what happens when a rat looks for a piece of chocolate in a T-shaped maze.
Right. And the data they extracted completely changed our understanding of learning.
What did the graphs look like initially?
When the rats first ran the maze, the brain activity was totally chaotic. Every time a rat sniffed a corner or hesitated at the T-junction, its neocortex was working furiously.
Just processing millions of data points to figure out this new environment.
Exactly. But they ran the rats through the same maze over and over, day after day. And as the route became familiar, the cognitive load shifted.
The brain activity in those complex decision-making centers actually began to plummet.
It did. The more they knew the maze, the less their brains worked. The decision-making centers went almost completely quiet.
So the basal ganglia just took over the navigation completely.
Yeah, the electrode readouts eventually showed this distinct U-shape in brain activity. There was a sharp spike at the very beginning of the maze when a partition clicked open to start the run.
Like an activation signal.
Right. And then a massive dip in activity where the brain was practically dormant during the actual running of the maze.
And that is wild. They're just running on pure autopilot.
And then there was another sharp spike at the very end when the rat found the chocolate.
So the brain only wakes up to recognize the start of the routine and to register the reward at the end. Everything in the middle is just chunked.
Fully chunked, it is effectively a biological macro script.
Just executing pre-written code. And, this isn't isolated to rodents in a lab. There is a really profound, albeit tragic, human case study in the sources.
Are you talking about Eugene Pauly?
Yeah, referred to as EP in the medical literature. He contracted viral encephalitis, which just tore through his brain and completely destroyed his medial temporal lobe.
Including his hippocampus, which is crucial.
Right, so he suffered from catastrophic amnesia. His conscious memory was entirely wiped out.
He couldn't remember a conversation he'd had just 30 seconds prior?
No, not at all. If you asked him where his own kitchen was, or to draw a map of his house, he just couldn't do it.
Yet his wife noted that he would get up every morning, walk out the front door, navigate this complex path around his neighborhood, and return home.
Without ever getting lost. If his memory was completely gone, how was he navigating a three-dimensional environment?
Well, the virus destroyed his hippocampus, but it entirely spared his basal ganglia. His habit center was completely intact.
So he didn't need conscious memory to walk around the block.
Not at all. He relied on environmental cues, the sight of a specific oak tree, the angle of a driveway, the color of a neighbor's mailbox.
And those cues automatically triggered the next sequence of steps. The basal ganglia was just running the chunked maze routine, basically.
Exactly. It is absolute proof that habits operate entirely independently of conscious memory and logical thought.
I often visualize a habit like a water channel carved into the side of a jet hill. Once that physical path is dug, the water's just going to automatically flow down it.
Because it is the path of least resistance.
Right. You don't have to force the water. Gravity and the trench do the work. But this is where I start to struggle with the biological logic a bit.
How so?
Well, if the basal ganglia is just this tape recorder playing a chunked script to save energy, why do bad habits feel so agonizing to break?
I see what you mean.
Yeah, because a computer script doesn't throw a physical tantrum when you hit pause. If I know eating a massive pastry at 3 o'clock is bad for me, and my logical brain says no.
You don't just feel a neutral redirection of energy.
Exactly. I feel a visceral physical itch. Why is there actual discomfort when we try to resist the tape recorder?
That physical discomfort points to a fundamental misunderstanding of what a habit actually is at the neurochemical level. It isn't merely a passive trench carved in the dirt.
It's more active than that.
Much more active. It is an engine fueled by a very demanding neurochemical process. To understand it, we have to look at the three-part architecture of the habit loop.
Okay, break that down for me.
First, there is the cue. That is the trigger that tells your brain to drop into automatic mode, like the click of the partition for the MIT rats.
Okay, cue is step one.
Second is the routine, which is the behavior itself. And third is the reward, the payoff that signals to the brain that this loop is worth remembering.
Cue, routine, reward. Got it.
Now, the reason bad habits are so hard to break is that your basal ganglia is entirely amoral.
Meaning it doesn't care if the habit is good or bad.
It cannot differentiate at all between a healthy reward, like endorphins from a morning run, and a destructive reward, like the dopamine rush from gambling.
Wow. So once that loop is encoded, the pathway is just permanent.
Pretty much permanent.
Yeah.
But the engine that drives you down that pathway, the thing that causes that physical itch you mentioned, is craving.
Craving, the anticipation. The sources highlight this brilliantly with the story of a macaque monkey named Julio, actually.
Yes, Julio is a perfect example. He was a subject in the laboratory of Wolfram Schultz, a pioneering neuroscientist at the University of Cambridge.
And Schultz was mapping dopamine neurons.
Right.
To see how rewards affect learning.
Exactly. He placed Julio in a dimly lit room, seated in a chair facing a computer monitor, with a tube positioned near his mouth.
And Julio's task was remarkably simple, as I recall. Whenever a specific shape flashed on a monitor, like a yellow spiral or a red squiggle.
He just had to reach out and pull a lever.
Right. And if he executed the routine correctly, a drop of sweet blackberry juice would run down the tube directly onto his lips.
So there's the complete loop. The visual shape is the cue, pulling the lever is the routine, and the blackberry juice is the reward.
And what did Schultz's monitor show in the early stages?
Exactly what you would expect. Julio would see the shape, pull the lever, taste the juice, and his brain would show a massive spike in dopamine.
The neurochemical signal for pleasure. Basically his brain saying, hey, I got a reward.
Right. But as the experiment was repeated hundreds of times and the habit loop solidified, the brain scans revealed this profound physiological shift.
The timing of the dopamine spike actually moved, didn't it?
It shifted completely. The I got a reward spike stopped happening when the juice arrived. Instead, it started happening the exact millisecond he saw the yellow spiral on the screen.
Wait, so his brain was experiencing the pleasure of the reward before the reward was actually delivered.
Yes, his brain was anticipating the juice.
That anticipatory spike is the missing link. That is what Schultz identified as neurological craving, right?
Exactly. The dopamine hit from the cue creates an expectation that the brain demands be fulfilled.
And because Julio's brain expected that blackberry juice, the researchers decided to change the game to see what would happen.
Yeah, what happened when Julio pulled the lever and the juice was delayed or diluted or didn't arrive at all?
His behavior completely deteriorated. The joy of anticipation instantly curdled into deep distress.
He became visibly angry, frustrated, despondent. The craving became an actual painful psychological state.
And once that state was triggered by the visual cue, he couldn't simply choose to walk away, could he?
No, the researchers could open the door to the lab, offer him normal monkey chow, even let other monkeys into play. Julio wouldn't budge.
The neurological craving just kept him glued to the monitor, staring at the screen, yanking the lever over and over again in this desperate state.
Just trying to force the universe to deliver the reward his brain had already been promised.
Honestly, apply that directly to the listener's 3 o'clock afternoon slump. When I am sitting at my desk, it isn't actually the physical granola bar I am consciously desiring.
No, it's the anticipation.
Right. Our brains have associated the specific time of day or the environmental cue of the desk with the reward of a dopamine rush.
The second the clock hits 3, your brain spikes with that anticipatory pleasure.
And if we try to use our logical brain to say no, the unfulfilled anticipation turns into a roaring craving. We are literally Julio pulling the lever, ignoring logic, because the basal ganglia is demanding its juice.
It's so true. And, the corporate world, particularly in marketing and retail architecture, understands this neurological vulnerability with terrifying precision.
Oh, for sure. The sources detail that phenomenon, often referred to as the Cinnabon effect.
Right. If you analyze the layout of major shopping malls, you will notice that Cinnabon franchises are rarely positioned inside the main food court.
Yeah, they're usually away from the pizza and burger stands, right? Down a long hallway or near an entrance.
Exactly. They are deliberately managing the airflow. They want the scent of cinnamon and sugar to travel down the corridor completely uninterrupted by the smell of garlic or fried chicken.
They are weaponizing the cue.
They absolutely are. By the time a shopper actually turns the corner and makes visual contact with the storefront, their olfactory receptors have been picking up the cue for several minutes.
So the basal ganglia has already triggered the anticipatory dopamine spike.
The neurological craving is fully formed. The shopper doesn't consciously decide they are hungry for a pastry. Their brain is already demanding the reward.
And they just reach for their wallet on complete autopilot. It is wild. And fast food chains execute the exact same strategy, don't they?
Using visual and chemical engineering, yes. Families who leave their house with the firm intention of eating a healthy dinner will suddenly find their car pulling into a drive-thru.
Because the visual architecture of a McDonald's or a Burger King is ruthlessly standardized. The golden arches look identical in every city on Earth.
It is an immediate, unmistakable visual cue.
And the food itself is engineered to lock in that craving. The sources note that fast food French fries are designed to literally begin disintegrating the millisecond they hit your saliva.
It delivers a concentrated hit of salt and grease to the brain faster than chewing a vegetable ever could.
So the standardization of the cue and the rapid delivery of the engineered reward ensure the habit loop is practically inescapable.
But this brings us to a critical junction in our understanding, honestly.
Which is?
Well, If we know the basal ganglia cannot be reasoned with and that neural pathways never truly disappear once chunked, are we simply trapped?
Right. If dopamine cravings actively override our prefrontal cortex, is behavioral change impossible once a habit is ingrained? It paints an incredibly bleak picture of free will.
It does. But the sources don't leave us stranded there. There is a specific methodology for hacking this system.
Arguably the most important mechanism in behavioral psychology, the golden rule of habit change.
The premise is brilliant in its pragmatism. If we cannot erase the deeply carved water channel, we cannot waste our energy trying to build a dam to stop the water.
Because the pressure will eventually break the dam.
Exactly. Instead, we have to hijack the flow of the water.
To illustrate this, the sources look at the high-stakes world of professional sports, specifically Tony Dungy.
The legendary NFL coach, right? He took the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Indianapolis Colts and transformed them into Super Bowl champions.
And his approach to coaching was highly unorthodox at the time. Usually, a new head coach brings in a massive playbook full of incredibly complex new schemes to outsmart the opponent.
But Dungy threw that philosophy out the window. He understood the neuroscience of high-stress environments.
Because in the middle of a football play, an athlete has fractions of a second to react.
Right. If a linebacker has to pause, consult his conscious memory, and consciously decide which complex defensive scheme to execute, the running back is already past him.
Conscious thought is just too slow.
Far too slow. Dungy knew that under extreme pressure, the brain defaults to its deepest habit loops.
The players would inevitably revert to the ingrained routines they'd practiced their entire lives.
So he didn't attempt to extinguish their old habits. He didn't ask them to unlearn anything. He used the golden rule.
He kept the exact same cues and provided the exact same rewards, but he fundamentally altered the routine.
Exactly. A linebacker's visual cues remained identical. The spacing of the offensive lineman, the angle of the quarterback's foot.
And the reward remains the same too, right? The adrenaline of the tackle, the praise from the coach.
But the reaction to those cues is what Dungy relentlessly reprogrammed.
So instead of reading the cue and running through a decision tree, Dungy drilled them until their routine was a simple, automatic, predetermined physical reaction.
Yes. When you see the quarterback's foot shift this way, you automatically step 2 paces to your left, no thinking.
By keeping the familiar cues and rewards, the players didn't have to fight their own brains.
The habit loop still fired, but it executed Dungy's new, highly efficient routine instead of the old one.
It is essentially tricking the basal ganglia. Now, that makes sense for elite athletes with millions of dollars on the line, but how does this scale down to, like, the private habits of everyday life?
The sources provide a clinical case study of a woman named Mandy for this. She suffered from a severe, lifelong nail-biting habit.
Oh, right. This illustrates habit reversal training. She had bitten her nails down to the quick her entire life, right?
Yeah, often until they bled. She tried sheer willpower, foul-tasting polish, but nothing worked because the craving overpowered her conscious restraint.
So her therapist played detective to isolate the exact components of her loop. First, identifying the cue.
And for Mandy, the cue wasn't hunger or a specific time of day, it was a physical sensation.
A subtle feeling of tension in her fingertips, usually triggered when she was bored or anxious.
Right, and the reward wasn't the taste of the nail. The reward was the fleeting sense of physical stimulation that satisfied that localized tension.
Biting the nail provided a microscopic burst of sensory relief.
Once the therapist mapped the cue and the reward, they applied the golden rule. They knew telling Mandy to simply stop biting was biologically impossible.
So they gave her a competing response, a new routine.
The instructions were precise. Whenever Mandy felt that tension in her fingertips the cue, she was not allowed to ignore it. Instead, she had to put her hands in her pockets, or tightly grasp a pencil, or rub her arm.
She had to substitute the destructive routine of nail biting with a benign routine of physical pressure.
Crucially, grasping the pencil provided the exact same reward. It delivered physical stimulation that satisfied the tension.
The basal ganglia still received its cue and got its sensory payoff. And over weeks of practice, the new, healthier routine formed a deeper water channel.
The brain got what it wanted, but the destructive behavior was bypassed entirely.
So if we map that onto our listener's life, let's say you want to stop the habit of mindlessly scrolling on your phone in bed until 1 in the morning.
Trying to ban the phone through sheer willpower is treating the symptom, not the loop.
Exactly. You have to diagnose it. What is the cue? Is it the physical sensation of your head hitting the pillow? Or the sudden silence of the room allowing anxiety to creep in?
And what is the actual reward the brain is seeking?
Is it visual distraction? The dopamine hit of social connection. If the true reward is just distraction to quiet an anxious mind, you need a new routine that provides that exact same distraction.
Like reading a gripping fiction novel or listening to an engaging audio documentary.
Keep the cue of getting into bed, keep the reward of distraction, but swap the routine of the screen for something that allows the brain to eventually sleep.
The mechanics are pretty foolproof in a controlled environment, but the research does point out one massive vulnerability here.
Which is,
The golden rule is highly effective when life is stable, but when an individual experiences a severe crisis, reworked habits are incredibly fragile.
like losing a job or extreme trauma.
Under massive stress, the brain panics and often overrides the new routine, scrambling back to the deepest, oldest habit loops for comfort.
Which actually brings up one of the most surprising elements in the source material. Alcoholics Anonymous.
It seems strange to include a spiritually based, community-driven program in a neuroscience discussion, but AA is a massive, real-world laboratory for the golden rule.
AA doesn't explicitly teach the neurobiology of the basal ganglia, but its entire methodology is built around hacking the habit loop.
The program requires members to inventory their emotional state to identify the exact cues that drive their drinking, like anger or loneliness.
Then it forces them to identify the rewards they were seeking, usually emotional numbness or camaraderie.
And then it swaps the routine.
Instead of going to a bar when they feel lonely, they go to a meeting. The cue is loneliness, the reward is connection, but the routine is sharing their story in a church basement instead of taking a shot.
But AA provides the missing ingredient needed to survive extreme stress.
And that ingredient is belief.
Exactly. Belief. Researchers have found that for a reworked habit to hold together when life falls apart, you must possess an absolute belief that change is permanent and possible.
And sociological data reveals this kind of belief is almost never generated in isolation.
It practically requires a community. AA's profound effectiveness isn't just the behavioral swap, it is the group dynamic.
Sitting in a room with people who have faced the exact same cues and cravings, watching them successfully execute the new routine, fosters that deep-seated psychological belief.
Belief is the adhesive that keeps the new routine attached to the cue when pressure tries to tear them apart.
You cannot rewrite your neural pathways in an echo chamber. You need a community to reflect that belief back to you.
Very true.
Okay, so we have thoroughly dissected how to hack a single isolated habit loop. But there is a massive scaling problem here.
What do you mean?
Well, what if you don't just want to stop biting your nails? What if you want to completely overhaul your entire life, your diet, finances, productivity?
Or if you are an executive trying to change the toxic culture of a massive corporation.
Right. You cannot realistically sit down and diagnose thousands of individual habit loops. The cognitive load would be impossible.
Attempting to change every habit simultaneously is a guaranteed recipe for failure. The solution isn't to fight 1,000 tiny battles.
The solution is to find the master switch.
Yes. In organizational psychology, this is known as the concept of keystone habits, and it relies on the compounding power of small wins.
The story the sources use to illustrate this is legendary in the business world. It centers on Paul O'Neill taking over as CEO of Alcoa in 1987.
The aluminum company of America. At the time, it was a colossal, struggling behemoth.
Their product was commoditized, the workforce was unhappy, and investors were incredibly nervous.
O'Neill was brought in to save the company. He steps onto the stage at a posh hotel in Manhattan for his first introductory meeting with Wall Street's top investors.
And the room is expecting the standard executive playbook, right? Maximizing shareholder value, cutting costs.
But instead, O'Neill walks to the podium and says, "I want to talk to you about worker safety."
He points out that Alcoa workers are handling molten metal, and their injury rate is unacceptable. He declares his sole priority is to make Alcoa the safest company in America.
0 injury rate. And the investors absolutely panicked.
The sources note that prominent brokers literally ran out of the ballroom to find payphones so they could tell their clients to sell every share of Alcoa stock immediately.
They thought he was a naive idealist who was going to bankrupt the company.
But it turned out to be one of the worst pieces of financial advice in Wall Street history.
By ignoring the profit margins and focusing obsessively on worker safety, O'Neill fundamentally transformed every single aspect of the organization.
By the time he retired, Alcoa's annual net income was 5 times larger, and their market capitalization had skyrocketed by $27 billion.
It sounds like a corporate fairy tale, honestly.
It really does. It makes sense that an aluminum factory should be safe, but how does wearing hard hats translate into $27 billion? dollars?
It works because safety was a keystone habit. O'Neill understood that he couldn't just issue a memo mandating a more efficient company.
You cannot mandate a culture change. You have to engineer it through habits.
Exactly. He knew if he could disrupt the habits around one universal core issue, safety, it would force a structural chain reaction throughout the company.
It is like throwing a rock into a pond. You aren't trying to move the water at the edges. You're just trying to create the initial ripple.
Or to use a structural metaphor, finding the keystone in a Roman arch. You place the keystone and it locks all the other stones into place.
So what was the mechanical chain reaction at Alcoa?
To achieve zero injuries, the company had to figure out why injuries were happening. That meant completely overhauling their manufacturing processes to be safer.
But you can't fix a broken machine if you don't know it's broken.
Right, so O'Neill instituted a rule. Anytime an injury occurred, the unit president had to report it directly to him within 24 hours with a plan to ensure it never happened again.
But for a unit president to get that report to the CEO in 24 hours, they couldn't rely on the sluggish, bureaucratic chain of command.
They needed immediate, transparent communication from their floor managers.
And the floor managers needed the frontline workers to feel completely empowered to speak up about safety hazards without fear.
Exactly. So a mandate about safety inadvertently forces the creation of a world-class flattened communication network.
The keystone habit forces structural alignment.
And once that communication network was open, the workers didn't just report safety hazards, they started pointing out inefficiencies.
Like, hey, this machine is misaligned, it splashes molten metal, but it also wastes raw materials and slows down production.
Fixing the machine improved safety, but simultaneously improved quality control and profitability.
The keystone habit fundamentally shifted the entire corporate culture to be transparent and agile.
It became so deeply ingrained that O'Neill actually fired one of his top executives, Bob Barton, for failing to report a toxic fume incident.
Even though no workers were permanently injured, firing a top earner sent an undeniable message. The culture shift is non-negotiable. So if we extract that mechanism and apply it to an individual's life, if someone wants to completely overhaul their lifestyle, the instinct is to declare, I'm going to eat perfectly, work out daily, stop drinking, and budget strictly.
Which is the equivalent of a CEO demanding efficiency. It is a recipe for total cognitive overload and burnout.
The basal ganglia will rebel. Instead, you just have to find your personal keystone habit, your front pin.
The clinical data on personal keystone habits is incredibly robust. One of the most universally effective is habitual exercise.
The data shows that when people start exercising, even just moderately once or twice a week, a profound chain reaction occurs.
Without consciously trying to change anything else, they naturally start eating healthier foods, showing more patience with their families, becoming more productive.
And remarkably, they even start utilizing their credit cards less frequently, which sounds completely absurd. How does sweating on a treadmill rewrite your financial habits?
It isn't magic, it is a shift in underlying self-image and the creation of structural momentum. Keystone habits provide what psychologists call small wins.
When you accomplish a small goal, like a 30-minute workout, it fundamentally alters how you perceive yourself.
You shift your internal narrative from, I lack discipline, to, I am someone who honors commitments to myself.
That significantly reduces the psychological friction required to make other good choices. If you exercise, you are naturally the kind of person who eats a salad instead of a burger.
Or the kind of person who pauses before making an impulsive purchase. Another fascinating example is simply making your bed every morning.
That tiny action is statistically correlated with a higher sense of daily well-being and stronger budgeting skills.
Because you are starting the day with a completed task. You establish a baseline of order.
The small win creates a structure that allows other good habits to flourish. Okay, so we have isolated the keystone habit. We have momentum.
But we have to address human exhaustion.
Exactly. Even with the perfect keystone habit, there are days your environment turns against you. Your boss screams at you. You are stuck in traffic. Your inbox is overflowing.
In those moments of acute stress, the temptation to abandon the new routine is overwhelming.
How do you prevent the system from collapsing when you are completely exhausted?
You have to understand the biological limitations of your internal battery. Which brings us to willpower as a finite resource and planning for inflection points.
The internal battery. The sources point to one of the most famous and frankly cruelest psychological experiments ever conducted for this.
The radish versus cookie experiment by Mark Mervin and Roy Baumeister.
They recruited hungry college students and brought them into a laboratory that was absolutely saturated with the smell of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies.
On a table in the center of the room, there were two bowls. One piled high with warm cookies, the other filled with raw, bitter radishes.
Group A was told they could eat as many cookies as they wanted. Group B was told the cookies were off limits, they could only eat the radishes.
The researchers left the room and watched Group B stare longingly at the cookies, fighting every biological urge and forcing themselves to eat the bitter radishes.
They had to exert a massive amount of self-control. But the food was just the setup, right?
Right. After the eating phase, both groups were given a cognitive puzzle to solve. They had to trace a complex geometric figure without lifting their pencil.
But the researchers didn't tell them the puzzle was a mathematical impossibility. They were just measuring how long the students would persist before giving up.
The discrepancy in results is staggering. Group A, the cookie eaters, worked on the impossible puzzle for an average of 19 minutes.
But Group B, the radish eaters who had just spent 20 minutes actively suppressing their cravings.
They quit after an average of just 8 minutes. They were irritable, complained the experiment was stupid, and simply gave up.
This experiment fundamentally revolutionized how we view self-discipline. Willpower isn't just an inherent character trait.
It is a finite physiological resource. It functions exactly like a muscle.
And just like your bicep gets fatigued if you do too many push-ups, your willpower muscle gets depleted if you use it too much.
The radish eaters drained their battery resisting the cookies. When it came time to endure the puzzle, they had nothing left in the tank. Baumeister called this ego depletion.
So applied to daily life, if you spend your morning holding your tongue in a toxic meeting and your afternoon forcing yourself through tedious spreadsheets,
By the time you get home, you are in a state of ego depletion.
are you simply biologically doomed to order a pizza and skip your workout because the battery is dead?
That is the exact systemic problem Starbucks faced as they tried to scale. Think about an entry-level Starbucks barista. They are young, working long shifts, on their feet.
Operating complex espresso machines and remembering wild drink modifications.
Their willpower muscle is constantly being taxed. And then, at the peak of the morning rush, a stressed-out customer starts screaming because their latte was made with whole milk instead of oat milk.
In that moment, the barista's willpower muscle is entirely tapped out.
They don't have the cognitive energy left to regulate their emotions. The autopilot response is to snap back, which ruins the customer experience.
Starbucks realized they couldn't just issue a mandate telling exhausted 19-year-olds to have more willpower.
They had to teach them how to navigate high-stress moments when their willpower was guaranteed to be depleted. They had to teach them to handle inflection points.
These are the specific moments of acute pain, temptation, or conflict where the urge to quit is strongest.
To survive inflection points, Starbucks used implementation intentions. They created pre-written routines for employees to follow, like the latte method.
Listen to the customer, acknowledge their complaint, take action, thank them, and explain why the error occurred.
By drilling the latte method, Starbucks removed the need for willpower. The cue is the angry customer. The routine is the pre-programmed Aletta steps.
The reward is the de-escalation of the conflict. By pre-planning the response, the barista completely bypasses their depleted willpower muscle.
You are writing a script for your future exhausted self.
The sources provide another dramatic medical example involving patients in Scotland recovering from hip replacement surgery.
A notoriously agonizing recovery. You have to begin moving the leg almost immediately to prevent scar tissue, which requires a Herculean amount of willpower when you are in agony.
Researchers wanted to increase compliance. They gave patients a booklet and asked them to write out a highly specific plan for their recovery.
The patients who recovered the fastest didn't just write vague goals. They explicitly mapped out the moments when the pain would be the most severe.
They anticipated their inflection points and wrote a script. When I stand up to go to the bathroom and the sharp pain hits my hip, I will immediately take one step forward.
When I see the cue, I will execute the new routine. They didn't wait until they were in agony to debate whether to take a step.
The decision was made in advance. The basal ganglia just ran the script. They didn't need willpower to take this step.
And psychological data shows that the very act of writing the plan yourself gives you a sense of autonomy, which actually reduces the rate of willpower fatigue.
When you feel like the architect of your recovery, your internal battery lasts significantly longer.
Exactly.
Wow. Let's take a deep breath and review the massive architecture of behavior we have just dismantled, and rebuilt.
It is a lot to take in.
We started by identifying the habit loop cue, routine, reward, and how it gets chunked in the basal ganglia.
We expose the engine of that loop, neurological craving, that anticipatory dopamine spike.
We learned we can hack it using the golden rule, keeping the cue and the reward, but intentionally swapping the routine.
We explored keystone habits, finding that single front pin that can knock down a cascade of behaviors.
And finally, we addressed ego depletion, learning to bypass fatigued willpower by writing implementation intentions for our most painful inflection points.
It is a comprehensive operating system for human behavior, but possessing the blueprint is only half the battle. We want to ensure you walk away with a concrete tool.
Based on the data, we have distilled a single, clear action for you to begin today, the diagnostic phase.
Your mission is to pick one single annoying habit you want to dismantle. The afternoon slump, biting your nails, whatever.
And for the next 3 to 4 days, do not try to stop doing the habit. Do not use your willpower. Just play the role of a detached scientist gathering data.
Your first objective is to isolate your cue. Habit cues almost always fall into one of 5 categories.
So when the urge hits, write down 5 things: location, time, emotional state, other people in the room, and the immediately preceding action.
If you run that diagnostic for a few days, the pattern will reveal itself. You might realize it's always at 3:15 p.m., you feel a spike of anxiety, and you just read an email from your manager.
There is the exact cue. And once you isolate the cue, your second objective is to experiment with your reward.
You need to figure out what craving is actually driving the engine. Instead of going to the vending machine, force a different behavior. Eat an apple, take a walk, go gossip with a colleague.
After you complete the experimental routine, set a timer for 15 minutes. When it goes off, ask yourself honestly, do I still feel the urge from my original habit?
Because if the urge is completely gone after talking to a colleague, you weren't craving a snack. You were craving social connection and distraction.
And once you identify the true reward, you can consciously design a new, healthy routine that satisfies that craving when the cue hits.
By diagnosing the components, you successfully hijack your own basal ganglia. You stop fighting your neurochemistry and start directing it.
This has been an incredibly enlightening journey through the mechanics of our own minds. Thank you to Cortex Lab for partnering with us to bring this level of deep, actionable knowledge to light.
It has been fantastic.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. The great 19th century philosopher and psychologist William James once wrote that our entire lives are but a mass of habits.
A powerful thought.
If that is true, if nearly half of our daily existence is executed by an unconscious script, then every time you meticulously diagnose a cue, swap a routine, or write an implementation intention, you aren't just changing what you do.
You are literally structurally choosing who you will become.
So tomorrow, when 3 o'clock rolls around and that familiar invisible urge taps you on the shoulder, what script will you choose to write? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We will catch you next time.